The storm rolled over Seattle like a living thing, thunder snapping against the glass walls of the mansion on Queen Anne Hill as if trying to break inside. Lightning flashed in sharp white slices, flooding the dark hallway outside the restricted research room 3, where Sophie Lane stood alone, with a mop in one hand and a small medical kit in the other. She was not supposed to be in this wing of the house. No maid was. But Victor Hale had ordered a surprise inspection in the morning, and she could not risk losing her job, not when her little brother depended on every dollar she earned. A sudden metallic clatter behind her made her jump, her heart twisting painfully, as the medical kit flew from her hands and hit the polished floor. The lid snapped open. A single square of medical adhesive slid across the tile like a fallen secret. Her breath shattered. She dropped to her knees as if gravity had doubled, reaching for it with trembling fingers, but it was too late. The adhesive had flipped over, revealing the ugly mark she had spent years hiding. The carved scar was shaped like two characters that would mean nothing to the world but meant everything to her, a 17. The signature of the man who once claimed she would never escape him. The scar was a brand of ownership disguised as punishment, cut into her skin by a police badge that had turned into a weapon. If anyone saw it, if it reached the wrong ears, he would know she was alive. And then he would come. A soft mechanical hum rose behind her. She froze. Slowly, helplessly she turned her head. Elias Grant sat in the doorway in his electric wheelchair, the stormlight flashing across the sharp planes of his face, making him look carved from iron and sorrow. He had moved without a sound, which was something he did often, not to scare people, but because his chair glided with an eerie quietness that matched his silence. His eyes dropped before she could cover herself. He saw the scar, the carved letters, the horror etched into her skin. She gasped as if stabbed. Her hands flew to her chest, clutching her shirt, hugging herself so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Tears blurred her vision as she scrambled backward on the slick tile. "Please do not look at that. Please do not touch that. Please." Elias did not move away. His brows pulled together, not in disgust, not in pity, but in something far more frightening. Recognition, understanding, fury that did not raise its voice. He reached for the coat, draped over his chair, his fingers shaking from weakness, not hesitation, and pulled it free. He leaned forward with effort, his torso trembling from a body that no longer obeyed him, and draped the coat around her shoulders, shielding her trembling form from the storm-chilled air and from his own eyes. His hand brushed hers as he adjusted the coat. She jerked at the contact, inhaling sharply, but he did not pull back. Instead, he asked softly but with a force that made her breath stop, "Who did that to you?" Thunder cracked above them. The house lights flickered. A shrill alert burst from the security panel at the end of the hall. Unauthorized movement detected near the main gate. Sophie flinched violently, gripping the coat tighter around her body, as if she could hide inside it, as if cloth could protect her from a nightmare that had walked on two legs. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. The words were barely a whisper, drowned under the growl of the rain, but still clear enough for Elias to hear. "If he finds me, I will not survive it this time." The storm faded by dawn, leaving the city washed in silver light as Seattle stretched awake below the hill, unaware of the night that had shaken the Grant estate. Inside the mansion, quiet returned like a blanket, smothering every echo, but Elias Grant had not slept. He sat in his private office with the glass walls dimmed to shadow, his chair angled toward the skyline he once ruled with effortless confidence. His hands rested against the metal frame of his chair, fingers tapping in an uneven rhythm he could not stop. He had seen scars before, he had seen cruelty, but never carved into someone who bowed her head when she walked, who apologized when she breathed, who moved through his home like she believed she did not deserve to take up space. Sophie Lane. He whispered her name without meaning to, surprised that it carried a weight in his chest he did not recognize. For 3 years he had lived inside a cage of his own making. The crash had stolen his legs, but the aftermath had stolen something deeper. The betrayal of his fiancée, who declared she could not build a life around a broken man, had been the final blow. Since then he had kept everyone at a distance, speaking only when necessary, working in silence, existing rather than living. His company remained a giant in the artificial intelligence world, but its creator had become a ghost inside it. Elias inhaled slowly, fighting the stiffness in his lungs, and forced his mind to the present. The image of that carved scar pressed behind his eyes. A 17. A code. A warning. Something deliberately inflicted to break a person down, until she believed escape was impossible. He had seen human downfall before. He had seen psychological warfare, He knew what a mark of ownership looked like, even if the world pretended such things did not happen in modern America. He told himself he was only thinking about it because it was a threat to his home, because a danger near his property was a liability. But that was a lie, and he knew it. He was thinking about it because he could not forget the sound of her voice, as she begged him not to touch her pain, as if touch itself could kill her. He rubbed his forehead, his temples pounding with exhaustion he had refused to acknowledge. He had been awake almost 20 hours, yet something inside him would not let him turn away from this puzzle. For the first time in years he wanted to understand someone. In the same house, Sophie moved through her morning tasks in complete silence. She kept her head down as she swept the marble hallway outside the east wing, avoiding the reflective surfaces that might show her expression. She still wore the coat Elias had wrapped around her, though she had folded the sleeves neatly and tried to disguise her attachment to it. Her chest ached with humiliation and fear, but beneath the fear was something else: confusion. Why had he protected her? Why had he looked at her not with disgust but with something close to promise? She had seen powerful men before, men who believed the world bent to their will, men who demanded obedience and punished defiance, but Elias was nothing like them. Even sitting in a machine of polished steel, unable to stand, unable to chase, he radiated a gravity that pulled everything in the room toward him. And last night, that gravity had turned toward her. She swallowed hard. She could still feel the moment his coat settled on her shoulders, the gentleness of a man who had every reason to be bitter yet chose not to be. A man who had not flinched when he saw the evidence of what she had survived. Her thoughts were shattered when Victor Hale appeared at the end of the hall, tall and sharp-faced with an expression that slid between suspicion and calculation. Sophie stiffened. Victor had a way of watching people that made her skin crawl, not because he was violent, but because he was observant in all the wrong ways. His eyes scanned her as if she were a variable he needed to understand. "Morning, Miss Lane," he said with a tone that carried no warmth. "You were assigned to the guest wing today. Why are you in the East Hall?" She clutched the handle of her mop tighter. "I was told to check for water damage from the storm, sir." His gaze flicked to the coat she wore. "That is Elias' coat." She froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She braced for accusation or punishment or suspicion, but Victor only held her eyes for a moment before giving a short, cold nod. "Make sure everything is spotless. Mr. Grant has a low tolerance for disorder." She exhaled when he walked away, but her relief was short-lived. Something in his expression told her he had noticed more than she wanted him to. She had learned to recognize danger by instinct. Victor Hale was not the kind that bruised skin, but the kind that destroyed lives without touching them. Downstairs, Elias instructed his chair to move to the therapy room. Ava Torres waited beside the parallel bars, adjusting the settings on a device that monitored muscle tension. "You look worse than usual," she said bluntly. "Maybe try sleeping like the rest of the human population." Elias gave her a flat look, which was the closest he came to humor. Ava crossed her arms. "Something happened last night, did it not?" He hesitated, his jaw working before he answered. "I saw something I should not have." Ava lifted a brow. "And what exactly did you see?" His silence was answer enough. Ava softened. "Elias, you cannot fix every wounded thing you find. You know that." His voice dropped low. "I am not trying to fix her. I am trying to understand how she is still alive." Ava said nothing. Her expression shifted as realization settled over her. "Whatever you saw, it affected you more than you want to admit." He looked past her to the bars that symbolized failure after failure. "I am not the one in danger," he said. For the first time his voice carried heat. "Someone carved a claim into her flesh. Someone believes she belongs to him. And that someone is looking for her." Ava exhaled slowly. "Elias, this is not your fight." "But it is," he said, "because it happened under my roof. Because she works for me. Because I saw her scar and now I cannot pretend ignorance." His words surprised him as much as they surprised Ava. But they were true. The man he once was would have looked away in order to maintain distance. The man he had become could not. For the first time in years, Elias Grant felt something wake inside him. Not anger, not guilt, not bitterness. Resolve. Sophie Lane was in his home. Someone dangerous wanted to find her. And Elias, despite the weight of his broken body, felt something he had never expected to feel again. A reason to stand even if he physically could not. Sophie tried to lose herself in work the next morning, polishing the chrome railing outside the elevator with slow, careful motions meant to steady her hands. But the image of Elias in the doorway, his expression carved in shadow and stormlight, as he saw the scar she had fought so desperately to hide would not leave her. She felt it behind her eyes no matter where she looked, the carved characters, the terror that had clawed up her throat, the way he had covered her with his coat, as if she were something fragile and precious, instead of something ruined. She should have been relieved that he had not asked more questions. She should have been grateful he had said nothing to Victor. But the quiet between them was not safety, it was pressure, and pressure always broke. She kept her head lowered as she stepped into the service corridor behind the east wing, a narrow stretch of polished concrete, lined with storage rooms and linen carts. She preferred this hallway because there were no windows and no reflective glass, nothing that might flash an image of her scar back at her. She was halfway to the laundry chute when she sensed someone behind her. Her breath stilled, caught in the cage of her ribs. For one heartbeat she froze like prey. Then she forced herself to turn. Elias Grant sat only a few feet away, his chair silent on the polished floor, his expression unreadable. She did not know how long he had been watching her. She had learned to mask fear, to fold it beneath her voice, until it sounded like nothing at all, but her hands betrayed her trembling as she clasped them together. "Mr. Grant, do you need something?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. He did not answer immediately. His gaze drifted to her collarbone, and she instinctively raised her hand to cover the place where his coat had shielded her the night before. "You have been avoiding me," he said. The words were not an accusation. They were an observation stated with the same precision he used when analyzing an algorithm. Sophie lowered her eyes. "I did not want to disturb your routine, sir." He studied her quietly. "That is not the reason." A flush crept up her neck. She tried to step back, but the supply cart behind her blocked her movement. She felt caged. He moved his chair slightly forward with a soft whir, close enough that she could see the faint scar at the edge of his jaw, the one left by shattered glass during the helicopter crash. He had his own marks, his own wounds, but unlike hers, his were not meant to claim him. He took a slow breath. "Last night I saw something I was not supposed to see." Her pulse hammered. She shook her head quickly. "Please forget it. Please pretend it was nothing." His voice deepened. "I cannot." She squeezed her arms around her body, hugging herself as if she could keep her bones from collapsing. "Mr. Grant, it was a mistake. You were never meant to see it." He leaned forward slightly, his tone steady but softer than she had ever heard it. "That mark was not an injury. It was inflicted with intention." Sophie closed her eyes. Her throat tightened until she could barely breathe. Why did he have to speak of it? Why could he not leave it buried where she had tried to hide it? She whispered, barely audible, "Please do not make me talk about it." For a moment he said nothing. Then he asked a question that drained the color from her world. "Was it done to control you?" Her legs wobbled. The supply cart rattled as her hand hit it for balance. She felt her heart drop into a place she had spent years trying to escape. How did he know? How did he see through her silence with such frightening clarity? She swallowed hard, but her voice cracked anyway. "No one has ever understood that. No one has ever asked the right question." Elias watched her with steady focus, his dark eyes unwavering. His chair hummed as he adjusted his position, not to intimidate her, but to ground himself. He knew the weight of trauma. He knew the violence of memory. He knew what it felt like to wake every morning inside a body shaped by someone else's cruelty. Sophie braced both hands against the cart, fingers gripping the metal, as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Her chest tightened painfully. She had not spoken these words aloud in years, not since the night she ran bleeding into the dark, with nothing but the clothes on her back, and the number carved into her skin. Her voice broke. "He did it because he believed I would never leave. He wanted a reminder to stay with me forever." Elias' jaw clenched, a rare flash of emotion slicing through his composure. A number, a code. His voice carried the quiet fury of a man who understood systems and ownership and the obsession with control. A 17. Why that marking? Sophie shook her head as tears gathered. It was a classification. His victims were catalogued like property. Those he marked were considered assets. No one in the department questioned him, because they thought the code meant something internal. She wiped her cheek quickly, ashamed to let him see the tears. "He said I was 17 on his list, that I belonged to him, that he could do anything he wanted because no one would care if someone like me disappeared." Elias felt something inside him shift like a tectonic plate waking from centuries of stillness. He had spent years building artificial intelligence designed to detect patterns and anomalies. He had built machines capable of predicting danger before it happened. But nothing in his brilliant world had prepared him for the brutality of a human being who turned a woman into a number. he said quietly. What he did was not possession. It was erasure. Sophie trembled. I do not know how he found out I survived. I tried to disappear. I changed everything. I left the state. I took a job no one would notice. I kept my head down. But last night when the alert went off near the gate, I knew it was him. Her voice fell to a whisper. He always watches. He always finds what he thinks he owns. Elias shifted forward abruptly, the motion jerky with emotion he rarely let surface. You are not owned. Not by him. Not by anyone. She looked up at him, then really looked, and for the first time she saw not the billionaire, not the powerful CEO, not the man trapped in a chair of steel, but a person who recognized her fear because he held his own. A person who chose to shield rather than exploit. A person who believed her before she even finished speaking. Elias lowered his voice. Whatever he believes, whatever he wants, he will not touch you again. Not while you are under my roof. Her breath hitched. Why would you risk yourself for me? You do not even know me. His answer came without hesitation. Because someone carved a claim into you, and I refuse to let that be the truth you live with. Something cracked inside her. Not fear. Not despair. Something quieter. Something like the first pulse of trust. Sophie moved through the West Wing with deliberate calm, dusting shelves and straightening the minimalist decor, as if each soft brush of her cloth could erase the memory of what she had told Elias. Her chest still felt tight, but there was a strange lightness beneath the tension, as if some part of her had been waiting for years for someone to ask the question he had asked, someone to see the truth and not recoil, someone to witness the scar without letting it define her. But trust was a dangerous luxury. She reminded herself of that with every step. Men who appeared gentle often had shadows behind them. Men with power rarely used it to protect. She knew this better than anyone. Still, the image of Elias listening without flinching returned again and again like a beam of light, reflecting off stormwater impossible to ignore. She had seen a shift in him, subtle but undeniable, when she told him the meaning of the code carved into her skin. Not pity, not revulsion, resolve. As if he had silently declared war on a man he had never met, but resolve could get people killed. Especially in a world where monsters wore badges. She paused to adjust a framed photograph on a hallway table, her fingers brushing the smooth wood as she studied the picture inside. It showed Elias standing with two other engineers, smiling in a rare moment captured before the crash. His posture was relaxed, his eyes bright, his hands steady. A man who walked freely. A man who stood tall. A man who had not yet been betrayed by gravity and steel and the fragility of the human body. Sophie lowered the frame with gentle care, her throat tightening. That man was gone, but the one who remained had protected her without hesitation. She whispered to the empty hall, I should not trust him. I cannot afford to. Her voice vanished into the silence. The elevator behind her chimed. She straightened quickly and stepped aside as the doors opened. Victor Hale emerged, adjusting the cuffs of his crisp suit, while surveying the hall with an expression of clinical calculation. His eyes landed on her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Miss Lane, he said lightly, you seem distracted. Everything all right? Sophie forced her expression into polite stillness. Yes, sir. Just finishing the morning duties in this wing. His gaze traveled over her, slow and probing, as if he were scanning her for inconsistencies. She fought the urge to shrink away. Victor stepped closer, reaching out to straighten a subtle wrinkle on her uniform. His fingers brushed the fabric of her shoulder. Sophie flinched violently before she could stop herself. Her breath hitched in her throat, a small sound escaping that she tried too late to swallow. Victor froze, brow arching, as if he had just uncovered a fascinating anomaly. That was an overreaction. Something personal you wish to disclose? She shook her head so fast it nearly made her dizzy. No, sir. Just startled. His smile sharpened, amused and cold. Interesting choice of word. Sophie stepped back, but his hand lifted again, fingertips hovering near her collar, as if to test the boundary she had instinctively defended. Before he could touch her, a voice cut through the hall, deep and edged with steel. Do not touch her. Both of them turned. Elias sat several feet away in his wheelchair, the storm gray light from a nearby window falling across his expression like a blade. His tone carried no raised volume, yet it struck the air with more force than a shout. Victor straightened his smile, thinning. Elias, I was simply correcting her uniform. There is nothing inappropriate about ensuring staff meet professional standards. Elias moved his chair forward with a controlled glide, his jaw squared. You will not put your hands on her. Not for any reason. Sophie stared, stunned. This was not the quiet man who rarely spoke more than necessary. This was someone else, someone she had not seen before. Victor narrowed his eyes. "You are overreacting." "Am I?" Elias replied, his tone low and dangerous. "Or are you accustomed to having no one question your behavior?" The hall vibrated with tension. Victor looked from Elias to Sophie, irritation flashing in his expression before he smoothed it away. "Very well," he said lightly. "If you prefer staff to walk around looking unprofessional, that is your decision." He turned sharply and began walking down the corridor, his shoes clicking against the polished floor. But Sophie knew better than to assume he was done. Victor Hale did not give up control easily, and he did not like being told no. Elias watched him leave before turning his focus to Sophie. She stood with her hands clasped at her stomach, shoulders trembling with the effort to hold herself together. "I am sorry if I embarrassed you," he said, his voice softening. "But I will not allow him to lay a hand on you." Something inside her cracked. No one had defended her like that since she was a child. No one had stood between her and danger without wanting something in return. She swallowed hard. "You should not involve yourself in this," she whispered. "It is not safe for you." Elias held her gaze. "Safety is not the point." Her throat tightened. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." He hesitated before answering, as if choosing his words with care. "When I look at you," he said slowly, "I do not see someone fragile. I see someone who has survived things that should have broken her. Someone who still stands, even though I cannot." Her chest tightened painfully. She took a shaky step back, not out of fear but out of the unbearable weight of his sincerity. "Please," she whispered, "do not say things like that." He tilted his head. "Why not?" "Because it makes me want to trust you. And I cannot afford to trust anyone." Elias looked at her with a calm intensity that made her breath hitch. "I am not asking for your trust. I am asking for your permission to protect what is under my roof." She blinked fast, fighting tears. Trust was not something she gave. It was something that had been stolen from her again and again. But Elias had returned a piece of it, simply by refusing to let Victor touch her. A tiny spark flickered inside her chest, faint but real. The first spark of trust. And it terrified her. The day darkened earlier than usual, as if the storm from the night before had not finished speaking. Heavy clouds gathered over the Grant estate, swallowing the late afternoon light, until every shadow seemed deeper, and every sound sharper. Sophie carried a stack of freshly folded towels through the lower corridor, her breath steady but her nerves taut. She kept listening for things she did not want to hear, footsteps that did not belong, the clink of metal from a belt she once dreaded, the kind of silence that preceded danger. She told herself she was imagining it, that the alert at the gate might have been a false alarm, that the world outside the mansion was not closing in on her again. But anxiety did not obey logic, it obeyed memory. She paused at the base of the glass staircase that led toward the open concept living room, a long, sweeping space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-soaked city. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet where danger could slip in unnoticed. She moved to place the towels in a cabinet when a new sound cut through the stillness, a soft chime from the security system, one she had heard only once before. Manual breach detected at lower terrace door. Her entire body went cold. She pressed her back to the wall, her breath tight and shallow, her fingers curling into the towels, as if fabric could anchor her. Not again, not here. Her mind scrambled through distances. The terrace door was only 2 hallways away. Close enough that a determined man could cross the space in seconds. Close enough that she might not outrun him. She forced herself to move her feet, light her breaths shallow, trying to head toward the kitchen where there were more people. But another sound froze her. A faint creak from the glass door leading to the courtyard. The unmistakable shift of weight on a handle. Her vision tunneled, her heartbeat slammed against her ribs. The towels slipped from her hands, scattering like white flags on the floor. Her throat seized as a whisper escaped her. No, not here, not again. She tried to walk, but her legs buckled, her body collapsing against the edge of the marble counter. Her breaths came in short, jagged bursts, as the first wave of a panic attack closed around her lungs. She pressed her hand to her chest, desperate for air, her vision blurring. Her knees hit the floor and she curled inward as if the smallness of that posture might make her invisible. She did not hear the approach of Elias' chair until the soft whir broke through the static roar inside her mind. "Sophie." The force of her name on his voice cut through the haze. She lifted her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, her breaths erratic. "The system," she gasped, "the door, someone is inside." Elias moved his chair closer, but before he could reach her, she slipped sideways, her head nearly striking the corner of the marble island. A rush of fear surged through him, something primal and fierce. Without thinking, without planning, without calculating risk or pain, Elias launched himself sideways out of his chair. The chair tipped violently, crashing against the floor as he twisted his torso, dragging his unresponsive legs with him. The impact sent a bolt of pain up his spine, but he ignored it as he hit the ground hard. His palms scraped against the tile, but he stretched his body toward her, catching her head with both hands just before it struck the sharp corner. The breath was knocked out of him, but he held her, pulling her into the shelter of his arms, bracing her against his chest. His entire body trembled from the strain, but he refused to loosen his grip. Sophie sobbed into his shirt, her panic spiraling, her hands clutching at him as if she were drowning. He lowered his voice, steady and grounding, fighting his own pain to reach her through the storm in her mind. "Sophie, listen to me. Look at me. You are safe. No one is coming near you. Not while I am here." Her breaths came in broken gasps, her nails digging into the fabric over his shoulders. She could not process his words, only the warmth of his hands holding her head, the weight of his body shielded over hers, the impossible presence of a man who had thrown himself out of a wheelchair to keep her from breaking. Her voice cracked. "I cannot breathe. I cannot. Elias held her tighter. "Yes, you can. Focus on my voice. I am here. You are not alone. You are safe. Nothing will happen to you while I am breathing." She buried her face in his chest, her tears soaking through his shirt as tremors shook her body. His arms tightened, one around her shoulders and the other supporting her head. The position sent knives of pain through his lower back, but he endured it. He had endured worse. What he could not endure was seeing her collapse alone. Slowly, her breaths began to lengthen, still shaky but less frantic. Her hands loosened on his shirt, her muscles no longer locked in panic. Her forehead rested against his heartbeat. It was unsteady but strong. She whispered against him, her voice small and broken. "I am sorry, I did not mean to fall." He shook his head, breathless but certain. "Do not apologize. You did nothing wrong." "But what you did," she whispered, trembling, "what you did was reckless. You could have hurt yourself." His breath escaped in something like a laugh, low and strained. "I am already hurt, Sophie. Protecting you will not change that." She lifted her head slowly, her eyes rimmed red, her lashes wet. When she met his gaze, the world seemed to narrow until there was only the two of them, and the echo of the storm inside their chests. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. "Why would you throw yourself out of your chair for someone like me?" His answer came without hesitation, shaped by instinct rather than logic. "Because I could not watch you fall." Something in her broke open, something soft and trembling that had been sealed behind fear for years. She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. His breath caught. She whispered, "You do not understand. No one has ever caught me before." He closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying something inside himself. "You deserve to be caught," he said. "You deserve safety." Her throat tightened. Her hand fell back to her chest, touching the place where his coat had been the night before. Her gaze lowered to his twisted position on the floor, the overturned chair behind him. "You should not have done that," she whispered. But there was no anger in her voice. Only awe, only disbelief, only the fragile beginning of trust. Slowly, the feeling in her legs returned. She pushed up onto her knees, then slid one arm around him, trying to help him sit upright. He winced at the movement and she froze. "Did I hurt you?" "No," he said through clenched teeth. "You did not. I chose this." He tried to sit up straighter, but his legs lagged behind, unresponsive and heavy. Sophie guided him gently, careful not to cause more pain. Her fingers brushed the back of his shoulder, and he closed his eyes again, not from discomfort but from the strange comfort of her touch. When she finally helped him sit against the base of the counter, his breath was uneven but steadier. She looked at him with a mix of fear and gratitude and something deeper she did not dare name. "That was unthinkable," she whispered. "Yes," he said. "And I would do it again." The security system chimed a second time, but this time the alert screen displayed a harmless cause. "Wind pressure on terrace door. False breach." Sophie exhaled shakily, but Elias watched her with a calm certainty. "I will not let anything harm you," he said. "Not inside this house, not outside it." Something fragile and profound shifted between them then. Not love, not yet, but the unmistakable beginning of it. Evening settled over the Grant estate with a heavy quiet that felt different from other nights, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Rain tapped against the panoramic windows of the main living room, in soft intermittent rhythms, each drop a tiny echo of the storm that had erupted inside Sophie earlier. She moved slowly through the room with a basket of blankets, her legs still shaky from the panic attack, and her mind replaying the impossible image of Elias throwing himself from his chair to shield her. Every time she blinked, she saw his hands catching her head before the marble edge could. Every time she breathed, she felt the echo of his words, "You deserve to be caught." She did not know what to do with those words. She was not built for them. She had lived too long in hiding, too long waiting for footsteps behind her, too long learning that trust was the most dangerous risk of all. Yet she could not pretend she had not felt something when his body curved over hers, protecting her without thought for himself. She set a blanket on the sofa, trying to steady her pulse, when the soft, familiar hum of the electric wheelchair approached from the hallway. She turned. Elias entered, moving slower than usual, his posture tight with the lingering pain from the fall. "Do you need help, sir?" she asked quietly, her voice still thick. "No," he said. "Or maybe yes. I am not sure." His honesty disarmed her, pulling her gaze upward. He stopped near the window, where the lights of downtown Seattle shimmered in the distance, and looked at her as if gathering courage. "I wanted to check on you," he said. "You left the kitchen before Ava could examine you." "I did not want to be a burden," she said. "I did not want anyone to fuss." "Sophie," he said gently, "your mind was drowning. You almost hit your head on stone. You think that is fussing." She looked away. "Panic attacks are not new to me, sir." He hesitated, then said with quiet precision, "And yet you faced it alone until you collapsed." She hugged her arms around herself, rubbing her hands up and down to warm muscles that had gone cold. "I did not want you to see that," she whispered. "It is shameful." Elias' eyebrows drew together with a sudden intensity. "Shameful," he repeated. "Why would your pain ever be something to hide?" "Because," she said, swallowing hard, "people always said I was dramatic, or unstable, or exaggerating. They said I provoked what happened to me." His jaw tightened. "They were wrong." She shook her head, tears forming before she could stop them. "You do not understand. When a man like him marks you, he does not just cut your skin. He cuts your voice. He cuts your certainty. He makes you believe you deserve every awful thing he does." Elias watched her, his expression unfolding into something fierce and protective. "Sit," he said softly, motioning toward the sofa. Sophie hesitated, then obeyed, lowering herself onto the cushions. Elias moved his chair to face her directly, and the closeness was almost too much. Rain streaked the windows behind him, turning the room into a dim cocoon of shadows and silver light. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me what he did." She shook her head, trembling. "No. If I say it out loud, it will feel real again." "It is already real, Sophie. Not speaking does not unwrite what was done to you. It only leaves you alone with the weight of it." She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. He waited, patient, quiet, unmoving, not demanding but inviting, and something inside her cracked open. She whispered, "He used to track me. Everywhere I went. He always knew when I left work or when my phone battery died. If I did not answer in seconds, he would appear out of nowhere." She wiped her cheek, but the tears kept coming. "He made me quit my job because he said people at the diner were staring at me. He said I made them stare. He said I made him angry." Elias' hands tightened on the armrests. "He was a police officer, was he not?" She nodded. "He said it made him powerful. That no one would believe me if I reported him. And he was right. I tried once. They told me he was a decorated officer. That maybe I misunderstood his intentions." Elias exhaled slowly, a sound filled with indignation and disbelief. "You did not misunderstand anything." Her voice cracked. "He told me I was his property, that mine was the second body he had marked. And the 10th, and the 17th. That is why he carved that code into me, to remind me where I fell on his list." Elias inhaled sharply, the sound quiet, but full of impact. "Sophie," he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice, "what you survived was not a relationship. It was captivity." Her breath faltered. "I escaped," she whispered. "But sometimes I feel like I never really left, because every time I hear a door open, or a voice that sounds like his, I feel myself shrinking. I feel myself disappearing." Elias shook his head with a slow, deliberate motion. "You are not disappearing. You are fighting, and not many people could survive what you survived." She looked up with tear-blurred eyes. "Why do you care? Why does any of this matter to you?" He looked at her with an openness she had never seen in him before. "Because someone once erased me too," she stilled. His voice softened, but the words carried weight like broken glass beneath velvet. "When the helicopter went down, I was not supposed to survive. And when I did survive, everyone looked at me differently. Not as a man, as a burden. as something broken that needed to be dismissed. When my fiancé left, she said she wanted a partner, not a patient, that I had changed too much, that she did not sign up for a life caring for someone who would never walk again. Sophie pressed a hand to her chest as if absorbing a blow. Sir, I had no idea. In the months after she left, I could not look at myself, he continued. I felt erased, not by force, but by abandonment, by the belief that I no longer had value. She stared at him through tears. You and I, he said quietly, are not the same, but we both know what it is to be seen as less than human. She covered her mouth to keep a sob from escaping. Elias moved closer, his chair gliding until he was only a foot away. Look at me, Sophie. She lifted her gaze. The sight of him nearly undid her. The stormlight framed him, the rain streaks behind him looked like falling threads of silver, and his eyes held not pity but recognition. You survived him, Elias said, and that makes you stronger than he will ever be. But I am still afraid, she breathed. Fear is not weakness, he said. Fear is memory. But you are not living that memory anymore. Not while you are here. Not while I am breathing in this house. A sob escaped her then, raw and unrestrained. She pressed her hands to her face as tears poured through her fingers. Elias did not touch her. He simply stayed, silent, present, unmoving. And that presence was more comforting than any touch. When she finally lowered her hands, she whispered, I do not understand why you care so much about what happens to me. Elias answered with quiet certainty, because you are under my roof, because you were hurt, and because no one protected you when they should have. His voice softened. I intend to change that. She stared at him through tears, her chest rising and falling in fragile waves. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar. Safety. Real safety. A safety that did not demand her silence or obedience. A safety offered without condition. A trembling smile threatened her lips, but she held it back, too afraid to let hope grow too fast. Thank you, she whispered. Elias nodded once. You do not need to thank me. Not for seeing you. Something fragile and warm curled inside her like the first glow of dawn breaking after a long, endless night. The night of truth had broken her open, but in the breaking something new had begun. The next morning arrived with an uneasy stillness, the air heavy with the kind of tension that settles before something breaks. The mansion felt colder somehow, as if the walls themselves sensed what was coming. Sophie moved through the kitchen carefully, arranging breakfast trays, while trying to keep her breathing steady. She had slept only a few hours, and even those hours had been fractured with nightmares, flashes of a door bursting open, hands grabbing her wrists, the sound of a badge hitting the table, the number carved into her skin. She shook the memory off and carried a tray toward the elevator, wishing her thoughts were quiet enough to let her focus. But something in the atmosphere felt wrong. Too still, too silent, a silence she had learned to fear long before she ever stepped foot in this mansion. As she turned the corner into the main hall, she slowed. A faint beeping echoed from the security console near the front entrance, a soft, repetitive alert she had not heard before. She approached cautiously. The screen displayed a message that sent a chill through her body. Recent access logs missing. System purge detected. She stared at the words, unable to breathe. Security logs did not erase themselves. Someone had hacked the system and deleted everything from the previous night, including the alert about the attempted breach. Her hands trembled as she backed away from the console. A purge like that was deliberate, purposeful, intelligent, and only someone with administrative access could have performed it. Only someone inside. Sophie turned quickly, heading down the hall toward the study where Elias usually reviewed morning reports. Before she reached it, she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate, she stiffened but forced herself to turn. Victor Hales stood at the far end of the corridor, his phone in one hand and a thin smile tugging at his lips. Miss Lane, he said pleasantly, almost too pleasantly early for you to be wandering near the secure panel, is it not? Her throat tightened. I was delivering breakfast, she said, holding the tray closer to her body like a shield. Victor stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, in a manner that made him look like a man, inspecting something he already owned. Interesting, he murmured, glancing at her with a look that made her skin crawl. You have a tendency to appear in places you do not belong. The comment was soft but poisoned. She shook her head, gripping the tray until her knuckles ached. I follow the assignments given to me, sir. Do you, he asked, voice dropping to something colder. Or do you wander where you should not? Before she could respond, a door opened down the hall. Elias emerged, rolling toward them with a measured calm, but Sophie could see the tension in his jaw. Victor, he said smoothly, is there a reason you are interrogating my staff? Victor turned with a faint chuckle. Just ensuring the household maintains its standards. Elias stopped beside Sophie, his presence a shield that steadied her trembling breaths. She fulfills her duties exceptionally well, he said. I trust her. The statement hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Victor tilted his head, eyes narrowing a fraction. Of course you do, he murmured, then offered a polite nod. I will be in the conference room preparing for the investor call. Good day to you both. He turned and walked away, but Sophie felt the weight of his suspicion long after his footsteps faded. Elias looked at her quietly. What did he say to you? Nothing, she whispered too fast. Nothing important. Elias watched her for a moment, his gaze perceptive. He erased the access logs, she said finally, her voice cracking with dread. Someone erased last night's security alert. His expression darkened. That means the breach was real. And that someone is helping him. She nodded, her breath shaking. Sir, if he finds me, he will not stop. He will not care that I work for you. He will not care about anything except dragging me back. Elias reached for the controls on his chair, shifting closer until his presence felt like a protective wall. Sophie, look at me. She forced herself to lift her eyes. You are not alone in this, he said. You will not face him without protection. Before she could answer, the front gate's security alarm blared through the mansion, sudden and violent. The automated voice filled the hall. Unauthorized vehicle approaching. Unauthorized approach on foot. Sophie froze, adrenaline crashing through her body like ice water. She staggered backward, one hand gripping the wall as her breaths shortened. Not again, she whispered. Please, not again. Elias pressed a command panel on the arm of his chair, bringing up a live feed on a nearby display screen. At first the image was blurry with morning fog, but then a figure stepped into view near the outer gate. A man in a dark jacket, walking with slow, deliberate certainty. He approached the camera, lifting his face toward it. Sophie saw the familiar smirk, the shadowed eyes, the thin line of a scar across his cheek where she had scratched him the night she escaped. The man who had carved A-17 into her body. The man who had once tracked her every move with a badge and a gun. He was here, at the gate, in Seattle. Her knees buckled, and the tray fell from her hands, clattering against the tile. Elias reached out instinctively, his hand brushing her arm. Sophie. She shook violently, shaking her head over and over. No, this is impossible, this cannot be real. How did he find me? Elias looked at the security feed again, his jaw tightening with fury. How long has he been watching? How many days has he been near us without being detected? Sophie could not answer. Her body was spiraling into the first edges of panic, the cold, sharp kind that made the world tilt. She stepped back, stumbling toward the laundry room, the nearest place she could hide. No, Sophie, wait, Elias called, but she was already moving, collapsing into the dim, narrow room where the scent of detergent and warm dryers provided the smallest illusion of safety. She pressed her back to the wall, sliding down until she crouched, knees pulled to her chest. Her breath came in ragged bursts. She clamped her hands over her mouth to hold in a sob. Footsteps echoed in the hall again, not his footsteps, they were too controlled, too familiar. Victor. She could hear him returning, his voice carrying down the corridor with feigned concern. Gate security seems to be malfunctioning again. How inconvenient. Elias' tone was sharp. That is not a malfunction. Someone is trying to enter my property. Victor hummed under his breath. Strange that they would come today of all days. Almost as if they knew someone worth finding was inside. Sophie choked on her breath. He knew. Victor knew. And he was enjoying every second. In the laundry room, Sophie felt tears spill down her cheeks, silent and frantic. Every nerve in her body screamed danger. She pictured the man walking up the driveway, his boots heavy on wet pavement, his hands already reaching for her. She hugged her knees tighter. She could hear Elias' voice, steady and low but burning with protective rage. Victor, close the gates now. Do not let him get within 30 feet of this house. Victor laughed softly, a sound dripping with malice. Well, I would, sir, but the system seems to have been reset unexpectedly. Access codes were wiped. Looks like someone cleared them. Elias' voice dropped cold. You did this. Sophie felt the air shift as if the mansion itself knew the truth had broken open. Victor, you are aiding and abetting a violent predator, Elias said. His words struck the corridor like a blow. Victor did not deny it. Some men deserve to reclaim their property, he said, and that maid of yours has been hiding from the wrong person. Sophie curled tighter, squeezing her eyes shut as if she could disappear. In the living room, Elias hit a manual override on his chair. Lockdown initiate. Residential Protocol 3. Metal shutters began sliding over the windows, sealing the mansion. Sophie heard the heavy thump of the gates beginning to close. Elias commanded sharply, Ava, call emergency services and report an attempted trespass. Code escalation required. Sophie trembled, rocking slightly in her corner. The past had found her. The nightmare had arrived at her door. But outside the laundry room, the sound of Elias' voice thundered through the house with a promise more powerful than fear. He will not touch her. Not while she is under my roof. Something inside her broke. Something inside her rose. The mansion descended into a tense metallic silence as the lockdown shutters sealed with heavy clicks, turning the open glass palace into a fortified cage of steel and dim light. Elias sat at the center of the living room, his hands braced on the armrests of his chair, his breaths sharp and controlled while he fought, the rising pain still lingering from throwing himself out of the chair the night before. Ava stood near him, phone pressed to her ear, relaying details to emergency services with a calmness that belied the urgency flickering in her eyes. Sophie remained hidden in the laundry room, crouched in the narrow space between the washer and the wall, her breaths small and rapid, her mind spiraling as she waited for the sound of boots pounding down the hall. But for the moment, the house held. The gates had closed. Lockdown was active. And the man hunting her was trapped outside. At least for now. Elias stared at the security feed as the man paced at the gate, banging once on the metal bars, as if testing their strength. He shouted something, the audio too grainy to catch. But Elias recognized the tone. A predator calling for his prize. He gripped the armrests harder, steadying the tremble in his hands, as he opened the digital security interface on the monitor beside him. Good, he whispered, when the system booted. He tapped several commands and a window opened, showing packet logs streaming across the screen. Incoming signal pings traced to the man's phone, each one a digital fingerprint. Elias' eyes narrowed. I can use this. Ava turned from the emergency call. Police are en route. They asked for a description of the intruder. I told them what we know. Elias nodded once his attention fixed on the code flowing across the screen. The man outside had been using a scrambler to mask his location, but the storm damage to the network revealed a few corrupted data points. Enough for Elias to capture. Elias connected to an off-grid terminal, a device he kept from his days designing covert AI tools, capable of reading metadata from unstable channels. Sophie did not know it, but Elias had spent years building systems meant to expose hidden threats, ones the world preferred to ignore. Systems that identified abusers in law enforcement, patterns of harassment, domestic violence cases buried under bureaucracy. He had always believed the code was too invasive, too dangerous for public use. But now, he had a predator on his doorstep, and a woman inside his home who needed protection. No more hesitation. He loaded the code. Ava watched him with concern. Elias, you should not be pushing yourself right now. Your pain levels are already elevated. He shook his head. Pain is irrelevant. He enabled the system, and the screen filled with encrypted fragments like broken glass rearranging themselves into readable data. GPS traces, message logs, call records, and an archived route history that showed the man's travel pattern over the last 2 weeks, including several nights parked near the bottom of the hill. Elias felt his stomach twist. He had been circling the estate for days, waiting for the right moment to strike. Elias clenched his jaw. He knew she was here. He was hunting her. Ava stepped closer, gripping the back of the sofa. What are you planning to do? Elias kept his eyes on the data. What he should have done years ago. Use the tools I built to expose men like him. Men who hide behind badges and threats. Ava frowned. If Victor is involved, we need proof. Elias exhaled. We will get it. Meanwhile, Sophie slid her hands across the tile floor, pushing herself farther into the narrow corner of the laundry room. Every muscle in her body was shaking the way it used to shake in the last house she lived in when she heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. Memories pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. She hugged her knees and whispered to herself, he cannot get in, over and over like a desperate prayer. Through her panic, she barely registered a faint sound approaching the laundry room, a soft whir that her mind recognized before her eyes did. Elias. His chair stopped just outside the doorway, and his voice came soft and low. Sophie, it is me. She pressed a hand to her mouth, breathing through her fingers, as she tried to calm the tremble in her body. He said gently, may I come in? She nodded, even though she was not sure she could speak. He maneuvered his chair into the small room, the wheels brushing laundry baskets. When he reached her, he lowered himself by adjusting the seat until he was closer to her height, though still sitting. She looked up at him, tears streaking her face. He found me, she whispered. I knew he would, but I hoped I was wrong. Elias shook his head firmly. No. He did not find you. He found a house that will not let him step 1 foot inside. That is not the same. She squeezed her eyes shut, unable to believe him. He always finds me. That is what he does. That is what he likes. Elias reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, his hand rested gently on her arm, steadying her. He said, his voice steady to the point of conviction, "You ran alone before. But you are not alone anymore. This time he will not win." She looked at him, her voice breaking. "You cannot guarantee that. But I can guarantee he will never touch you again while you are under my protection." She stared at him, unable to process the certainty in his voice. "You sound so sure." "I am," he said. "Because I am not just fighting him. I am fighting the system that protected him." That is what he never expected. Outside in the living room, the front gate security feed clicked as the intruder stepped back, pulled out his phone and began making a call. Elias glanced at the monitor from the laundry room doorway. His voice sharpened. "He is calling someone." Ava responded from across the house. "Emergency dispatch says they are 5 minutes out." Elias frowned. "That is 5 minutes too long." He turned back to Sophie. "I need you to tell me something difficult." She swallowed. "What?" "When you reported him, did you give a written statement?" She shook her head painfully. "They would not take one. They said it was a lover's dispute, that it did not require documentation." Elias nodded grimly. "Then we do this my way." He moved his chair back into the hall and gestured for her to follow if she could. Sophie pushed herself up using the washing machine as support, her legs trembling as she walked out of the room and into the soft, dim light of the hallway. Once she was beside him, he spoke quietly. "I have information that can expose him. But I need audio confirmation from you. A spoken record, a testimony." She felt herself sway with fear. "You want me to say it all again?" "Yes," he said. "Because this time someone will listen." She hesitated, trembling. "But if he hears me?" Elias shook his head. "The audio will go straight into a secure channel, not accessible from any outside device. I designed it myself." She stared at him, her chest rising and falling in small, uncertain breaths. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Elias met her gaze with quiet intensity. "Because he built a world where you were unheard. And I am going to build one where your voice is undeniable." Slowly, she nodded. Her fear did not disappear, but something steadier rose beneath it. Trust. Ava brought over a small lapel mic designed for interviews. Sophie took it with shaking hands, clipped it to her shirt, and stood in front of Elias. He pressed record. "Tell me what he did to you," he said softly. She exhaled, shaking, opening the door to truth once more. She spoke. Her voice trembled but grew steadier with each sentence. She told the story of the first time he followed her home, the first time he hit her, the first time he carved the number into her skin and told her she would never be free. She told Elias everything. And he listened, really listened. When she finished, he stopped the recording and sent the file into the secure evidence channel that routed straight to federal oversight and law enforcement review. Somehow, she felt lighter, not free, not yet, but lighter. Outside the mansion, the sound of sirens began to echo up the hill, approaching fast. The predator at the gate turned his head toward the noise, finally realizing the trap closing around him. Elias looked at the screen with a cold, steady gaze. "Run if you want, they will still find you, and this time you will not walk away." The sirens faded down the hill long after the officers escorted the intruder away, but the tension that had wrapped itself around the Grant estate did not leave with him. The mansion felt quieter than ever before, as if the walls were holding the echo of everything that had happened, every fear, every confession, every moment where the world shifted for both Elias and Sophie. By late afternoon, a soft calm returned, a fragile stillness that settled over the house like dust after a storm. Sophie sat at the dining table, arranging a set of documents. Ava had given her hands steady for the first time since morning. She had expected to feel relief now that he was gone, now that the police had taken him away in handcuffs, but her heart felt strangely hollow. Freedom should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt terrifying, like standing on a cliff where the ground had broken open beneath her. She gathered the papers and walked toward the kitchen, only to pause when she heard a low, strained breath from the rehab room. Elias sat by the parallel bars, the soft glow of sunset sliding over him, casting warm gold across the hard lines of his face. His shoulders were tense, his hands gripping the bars as he attempted once again to pull his body upward. His arms were strong and capable. His legs remained still, heavy, stubborn. He exhaled sharply and tried again. Sophie felt the pull instantly, a quiet magnetic urge that carried her to the doorway. He had thrown himself onto the floor for her the night before. Now he was trying to stand for himself. She stepped inside. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked softly. Elias released his grip, letting his body settle back into the chair. Sweat clung to his hairline. "I have been better," he said with a strained attempt at humor. Sophie approached slowly, sensing his frustration. "You do this every day, and every day it looks impossible. But you still try." He looked down at his unmoving legs, bitterness edging his voice. "Trying is not the same as succeeding." She hesitated, then moved closer, kneeling beside the chair. She placed her hand gently over his. "Yes," she said softly, "but trying is not nothing, it is everything." He blinked, surprised by her sincerity. She continued, "You threw yourself out of this chair to save me. You fought when your body resisted you. You chose pain just so I would not suffer more. That is strength, even if you do not see it." Elias looked away as if her words were too much to hold directly. She shifted her hands slightly, and the warmth of her touch traveled through him in a way he could not explain. No one in his life had ever spoken to him like that. Not after the accident, not after he became the man in the chair, instead of the man who built empires. Most people avoided looking at him for too long, afraid of pity, afraid of discomfort. But Sophie looked at him like he was whole, even when he felt far from it. A moment passed where neither of them moved or spoke, a quiet suspended between them, delicate and necessary. Then Sophie stood, suddenly aware of the closeness. "Would you like something to eat?" she asked gently. "You skipped lunch, and you will lose more strength if you do not take care of yourself." Elias nodded. "That would be good, yes." They went to the kitchen together, Sophie walking ahead and Elias following in his chair. She moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, collecting ingredients, heating the stove, slicing vegetables, while Elias watched her with a kind of quiet fascination. He had eaten meals prepared by chefs from Michelin star restaurants, meals crafted with precision, meals plated with artistic flair. But nothing tasted as grounding as watching someone cook because they cared whether he ate. She handed him a bowl of soup once it was done, setting it carefully on the tray attached to his chair. He said thank you almost under his breath. She smiled faintly and poured tea for herself. They ate in silence at first, the soft clink of utensils the only sound in the room. Then Elias said, "I listened to your recording after I sent it to the secure channel." She stiffened, her spoon hovering. "You did," he nodded. "You were brave." She swallowed. "I did not feel brave." "You were," he repeated. "Even if the world failed you before, it will not fail you now." She stared down at her tea, watching the steam curl upward. "I do not know how to live in a world where I am not running." He considered her words thoughtfully. "Then learn," he said. "And let me help you." She looked up sharply. "I cannot ask that of you." "You are not asking. I am offering." Her chest tightened. No one offered her anything without expecting something in return. But Elias was different. He wanted nothing from her, except the chance to give her safety, dignity, a voice. She felt warmth rise in her cheeks and quickly looked away. After dinner she washed the dishes, while Elias maneuvered himself toward the living room. When she finished, she joined him hesitantly. He gestured to the sofa. "Sit, I want to talk to you." She obeyed, heart fluttering with nerves. Elias rested his hands on the armrests, exhaling slowly. "I am aware that today was overwhelming, and that you may feel like this house is no longer safe." Sophie looked down, twisting her fingers. "I do not know how to feel, sir. Everything happened so quickly." Elias nodded, understanding. "I will be honest with you, Sophie. I cannot promise you a life without fear, but I can promise you that I will continue fighting for you. Whether it is through technology, law, or standing between you and a threat physically if I must." Her eyes widened. "Why? Why do you care so much?" His voice softened. "Because when I look at you, I see more than what happened to you. I see who you are, strong, resilient, and I see who you could be if you had the space to breathe without fear." Her throat constricted. "I am not strong," she whispered. "I break so easily." He leaned forward. "Everyone breaks. That does not erase strength." She blinked fast, tears threatening her vision. Elias hesitated, then asked softly, "May I show you something?" She nodded. He tapped a command on his chair, and a holographic projection flickered to life above the coffee table. It displayed the movement patterns he had extracted from the man hunting her, data scraps pieced together into a clear timeline. Sophie stared at it, fear tightening her body. Elias said quietly, "This is not to frighten you. This is to show you that you are not alone anymore." That technology itself will fight for you now. She swallowed. He continued, I built these systems because I believed in protecting people whose voices went unheard. You are one of those people, and I will not let the system fail you again. Something inside her shifted, a deep trembling thing that longed for rest after years of running. She whispered, I do not know how to thank you. Elias shook his head. Do not thank me, just allow yourself to stay. She looked up and their eyes met. The moment stretched warm and fragile. The quiet was different this time, not heavy with fear, light with possibility. They spent the next hour talking softly about small things, their voices weaving through the gentle hum of the house. Sophie told him about Liam, her younger brother, his autism, his brilliance with numbers, his gentle heart. Elias listened with rare warmth, his voice softening every time she spoke of the boy she had protected for years. She laughed once quietly, and Elias felt something in his chest expand, a sensation he had not felt since before the crash. When the hour grew late, Sophie rose reluctantly. I should rest, she said. Today has been long. Elias nodded, but his voice was gentle when he spoke. Sleep without fear, Sophie. She paused in the doorway, turning back. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, she smiled fully. Not out of politeness, out of trust. And the smile stayed with Elias long after she disappeared down the hall, warm and quiet, and full of promise. Morning arrived quietly and deceptively soft, as if the world was trying to pretend nothing dangerous had ever touched the Grant estate. A pale gold light fell across the floors through the raised shutters, the lockdown lifted at dawn. The house hummed back to life with its usual rhythm, but something inside Sophie felt unsettled from the moment she opened her eyes. She stood at the kitchen counter, filling a mug with tea, her fingers lightly shaking even though she tried to steady them. For the first time in years she had slept without waking from nightmares, but peace was a fragile thing, and she feared touching it too firmly would break it. She carried the tea into the living room, only to see Elias already awake near the far window, studying a document on his tablet. He looked tired, though not from fear. It was an exhaustion shaped by responsibility, by choices made in the dark that had consequences in daylight. His eyes lifted as she approached and softened slightly. Morning, Sophie. She nodded, offering a small smile. Morning, sir. Did you sleep? Not much, he admitted, but sleep feels like a luxury I can postpone. She frowned. You need rest. You cannot keep pushing yourself like this. He paused, setting the tablet on the side table. Rest can wait, he said, because protection cannot. She opened her mouth to argue, but the faint sound of footsteps interrupted them. Victor entered the living room with his usual composed gait, followed by two members of the tech division, carrying encrypted cases. Elias instantly straightened his posture, the tension around him tightening like a drawn bowstring. Victor offered a polite smile. Morning, Elias. I brought the quarterly data packets for your review. I imagine you will want to discuss them before the shareholder briefing this afternoon. Elias watched him closely. Thank you. Set them by the desk. Victor gave a slight nod, then glanced in Sophie's direction with a sharp, assessing look. She lowered her gaze, pretending to focus on her tea. Victor left the room, but the unease he brought lingered like a stale scent. Elias exhaled as soon as the door shut. Something is wrong with him, he murmured. More than before. Sophie hesitated. He had deleted the security logs yesterday. Maybe he thought burying evidence would protect your intruder. He will not stop, she whispered. If he helped him once, he might do it again. Elias nodded slowly. I am aware, and I am preparing. His voice was calm but ice-cold with intent. Sophie studied him silently, realizing that this man in a chair was not powerless as the world assumed. He possessed a mind that saw danger like a map, and she was beginning to understand why people once followed him without question. He commanded not by force but by certainty. She excused herself to begin morning duties, but as she crossed the hallway toward the storage room, she noticed an odd detail. Her badge access no longer worked. She scanned it twice, but the panel flashed red access denied. Her breath caught. She tried another door, same result. Panic crept along her spine. She hurried to the service office where staff assignments were usually updated. Her name was missing from the rotation board, completely removed. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned abruptly to see Victor leaning against the doorframe, arms folded, amusement in his eyes. Miss Lane, he said in a voice too silky to be genuine, I was just updating the staff list. Looks like your role here is coming to an end. Her stomach twisted. What do you mean? He shrugged casually as if discussing weather. There has been a breach of protocol. Sensitive information missing. Data copied. Evidence of tampering. She froze. I did no such thing. His smile sharpened. You were seen near restricted areas. Logs place you where you should not have been. And your proximity to the system purge yesterday is very concerning. Her heart pounded. That is not true. I was nowhere near the system purge. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. The evidence says otherwise, and since evidence is what matters, your employment is being terminated immediately. She felt the air leave her lungs. She whispered, "No, please, you cannot do this." Victor's eyes gleamed. "It is already done. Your badge has been deactivated. Paperwork is filed. You will pack your things and leave within the hour." She stumbled backward, her throat tight. "Why are you doing this?" "Because," he said with a cold smile, "you have become a liability. And liabilities do not stay in this house." Sophie's eyes burned with tears, but she refused to cry in front of him. She turned and ran down the hall, moving toward her room before anyone could see the panic rising in her chest. She shut the door behind her and locked it, pressing her forehead against the wood. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she grabbed her small duffel bag and stuffed her belongings inside. She could not stay. She would not let Elias be dragged into trouble because of her. She wiped her tears quickly, but they kept falling. She folded the coat Elias had given her days ago, hesitated, then placed it gently at the foot of the bed. She whispered softly, "Thank you." When she slipped out the back service exit, the cold Seattle air hit her like a blade. She looked back at the mansion, her vision blurring. Then she turned and walked down the steep hill, gripping her bag as if it were the only part of her life still intact. Inside the mansion, Elias searched for her 20 minutes later, after Ava told him she had not come to the physical therapy session. When he reached the staff hallway, her door was open, the room empty, the coat folded on the bed like a farewell. Something snapped inside him. A cold, crushing panic unlike anything he had felt, even in the moments before the helicopter went down. He spun his chair around, maneuvering through the hallway at a speed that sent the wheels skidding slightly. Victor stepped into the hall at the same moment. Elias' voice thundered before Victor could speak. "Where is she?" Victor lifted his brows. "If you mean the maid, she has been dismissed. Her employment was no longer suitable." Elias' eyes darkened into something powerful and terrifying. "You fired her." "Without my authorization." Victor shrugged. "As Chief Operations Officer, I have authority over household staff. I do not need your permission to protect this company from potential threats." Elias moved his chair closer, until the front wheels nearly touched Victor's shoes. His voice came out low, like the warning growl of an animal cornered too many times. "You have made a grave mistake." Victor smirked. "You care too much, Elias. It will ruin you." Elias gripped the manual override controls on his chair and shoved the joystick forward, slamming the chair into Victor's legs, forcing him backward into the wall. Victor gasped in shock. Elias leaned forward, his face inches from Victor's. "If anything happens to her," he said with a threat that vibrated through the air, "you will answer for it." Victor pushed him away with a shaky laugh. "She is gone, Elias. Let her go. She was a problem." Elias' voice broke quiet but fierce. "She was not a problem. She was the first good thing to happen to this house in years, and you drove her out." Elias spun his chair and headed straight for the garage. Once there, he loaded a portable battery into the slot under the seat, then initiated rapid charge. Ava ran in breathless. "Elias, what are you planning to do?" He answered without looking up. "Find her. Bring her home." Ava placed a hand on his shoulder. "Elias, your chair battery will not last on steep hills, and rain is coming again. You cannot chase her like this." He turned his head slowly, and Ava saw something she had never seen in him. Desperation. "I cannot lose her," he whispered. "Every person I have ever cared for has left. I will not let her be another ghost in my life." The battery charger beeped, signaling 60% power. It was enough. Elias rolled out of the garage and down the driveway. Rain began falling in thin, icy lines, soaking his clothes as he moved. At the end of the driveway, the chair stuttered, warning him of low traction, but he pushed forward. He reached the main road, his breath turning to mist in the cold. "Sophie." His voice cracked as he shouted her name into the wind. "Sophie, please. Do not leave me like everyone else." His words were swallowed by the storm, but his determination was not. Far down the road, Sophie turned at the faint, distant echo of her name. Her breath caught. Her steps faltered. She felt something twist painfully inside her chest. But she kept walking. Because she believed she had no right to stay. Because she believed he deserved someone unbroken. And because she had no idea Elias was fighting the storm, the slope, and his own broken body just to reach her. Rain battered the steep Queen Anne Hill, as if the sky itself were grieving with Elias, sheets of cold water slicing across the road, where his wheelchair struggled for grip. The wind howled between the houses, whipping his coat against the sides of his chair, soaking his hair until it clung to his forehead. His breath came in sharp, painful bursts, every push of the joystick sending tremors through his battered muscles. Yet, he kept going. Pain did not matter. Fear did not matter. The only thing that mattered was finding Sophie before the world swallowed her the way it had swallowed so much of his life already. Far ahead, Sophie walked with her duffel bag clutched tight against her chest, her steps uneven from exhaustion and heartbreak. She kept her head down against the wind, blinking away rain and tears as she made her way past the quiet row of townhomes that lined the steep incline. Every part of her wanted to turn around when she heard faint echoes behind her, but she forced herself forward. "You cannot stay," she whispered to herself. "You cannot ruin his life. You cannot bring more danger to his door." Lightning flashed, illuminating the curve of the road, and in that moment, she saw a bus approaching the stop at the bottom of the hill. Perfect. It was her only chance to disappear before Elias realized she was already gone. She tightened her grip on her bag and hurried down the slick sidewalk, her heart hammering with guilt and sorrow. Behind her, Elias reached the midpoint of the hill, his chair skidding dangerously as the wheels lost traction on the wet pavement. He nearly toppled to one side, but he jerked the joystick back with a cry of pain, forcing the chair upright again. "Sophie." His voice tore through the storm, raw and desperate. "Sophie, please stop. Do not leave me." She froze. It was not the command she expected. Not anger. Not disappointment. It was grief. Pure, unfiltered grief. She turned slowly, rain blurring her vision until all she could see was Elias struggling up the hill, his chair fighting the incline, his hands shaking violently as he pushed it harder than any human body should allow. She pressed her hand to her chest as something inside her cracked open. She stepped toward him, but before she could reach him, the chair hit a pothole hidden by the rushing water and lurched violently. Elias pitched forward the chair, groaning as the battery flickered. Sophie screamed. She dropped her bag and sprinted up the incline, slipping on the wet pavement, but pushing herself harder than she ever had. She reached him just as the back wheels spun uselessly and the chair began to slide backward down the hill. Without thinking, she threw herself behind the chair, grabbing the handles and digging her heels into the ground, her muscles trembling from the impact. Elias gasped breathlessly, "Sophie, stop, you will hurt yourself." She shook her head, rain pouring down her face. "You came into the storm for me. I am not letting you fall." She braced her entire body against the rolling weight, the small screech of metal against pavement, echoing through the storm as she held him steady. He forced himself to lift his head to look at her, their faces inches apart. "You left," he whispered, voice breaking. "You just left." Tears blurred her vision. "I had to," she cried. "Victor framed me. I could not drag you into his lies. I could not stay and ruin everything you built." Elias stared at her in disbelief. "Ruin? Sophie, you were the only part of this house that felt alive. How could you believe losing you would protect me?" She shook her head, rain dripping from her lashes. "Because people leave you when you need them most. Because no one stays once things break. Because I am not worth it." Something inside Elias snapped, not in anger but in clarity. He reached for the manual controls on the side of his chair, and with a strained exhale he disabled the motor, releasing the wheels. Sophie held the chair steady, using her weight to keep it in place. Elias looked at her with a fierce, trembling intensity. "Sophie Lane," he said slowly, every word a vow burned into the storm, "I am not leaving you. I am done losing the people who matter. I am done watching without fighting. I am done letting pain decide who I become." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "Elias, you cannot fight this. You cannot fight him. You cannot fight Victor. You cannot fight a system that does not care about people like me." He steadied himself, gripping the wet railing of a nearby fence. His voice dropped low, thick with a depth she had never heard. "I already have." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" Elias inhaled slowly, as if preparing to break open everything he had been holding inside. "While you were packing your things," he said, "I was in the server room pulling every encrypted piece of data Victor tried to bury. Fraud, manipulation, sabotage, corporate theft, collusion with your abuser. Everything he ever hid, I ripped it from the shadows." Sophie stared in wide-eyed shock. "You did that. For me. For us," Elias said simply. "Because Victor wanted you gone. Because the man who hunted you wanted ownership. Because the universe keeps trying to take from me the few things worth holding." and I refuse to let it take you. Her lips trembled. Elias, he continued before she could speak. You think you ruined something. You think your presence harmed me. You think I need someone perfect to stand beside me. But Sophie, I do not need perfection. I need truth. I need courage. I need someone who knows what it means to survive. And that someone is you. Sophie felt the hill tilt beneath her, though it was only her heart shaking. She whispered, why do you care so much about someone as broken as me? Elias lifted his chin, even though his neck trembled from strain. Because you see me, he said. Not the chair, not the fall, not the failure. You see the man still fighting inside this broken body. And you never looked away. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the rain. She steadied the chair as he shifted forward, gripping the sidebar with both hands. Elias, do not move, she pleaded. You will fall. He shook his head fiercely. I will kneel before I let you walk away again. With a sound that was half pain, half determination, he pushed himself upward, balancing his weight on his arms until he lifted himself partially out of the chair. Sophie gasped, reaching out, but he gave her a gentle nod. Let me. He braced himself, one arm gripping the railing, one hand pressing into the seat, trying to guide his legs into a bent position. His breath hitched, a broken sound filled with agony. But he did not stop. Slowly, shakily, impossibly, Elias lowered himself onto one knee, the rain drenching him, the cold biting through his clothes, but none of it mattered. He was kneeling on the street in front of her, a man who could not stand yet had chosen pain over surrender. Sophie stared at him, unable to breathe, unable to move. Elias looked up at her, rain sliding down his face like tears he refused to shed. Sophie Lane, he said, voice trembling but sure. You told me once not to touch the part of your life carved by someone else. And I listened. But now I am asking for permission, not to touch your past, but to touch your future. She covered her mouth, a sob escaping. Elias continued, I am asking not as your employer, not as a man in a chair, not as someone trying to save you, but as someone who has fallen for you with every broken piece of himself. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Elias waited, breath, shaking muscles, burning knees pressed painfully into the wet pavement. Sophie could barely form words. Elias, I am not good enough for you. I am not whole. I am not free. He shook his head. You are enough because you survived. You are enough because you kept your brother safe. You are enough because you keep fighting even when you think you cannot. You are the bravest woman I have ever known. She stepped closer, tears streaming. Elias, please stand, you are hurting yourself. He whispered, maybe. But the pain is nothing compared to losing you. She broke completely, then falling to her knees in front of him, the wet pavement soaking through her clothes. He reached for her face, his hands trembling as they cupped her cheeks. She leaned into his touch, unable to stop crying. Sophie, he murmured, his forehead touching hers. Come back home. Let me protect you. Let me be someone you can trust. Let me stay by your side even if I never walk again. She shook her head, sobbing. You cannot promise that. I can promise everything my body allows, he whispered fiercely. And more with my heart. Sophie closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of everything, by the storm, by the fear, by the impossible hope rising inside her. Finally, she whispered, yes. He froze. Yes, what? Yes, she breathed, letting her forehead rest against his chest. Yes, I will come home. Yes, I will stay. Yes, I choose you. Elias exhaled a sound that was almost a sob of relief. She helped him gently back into his chair, their hands intertwined, the storm slowly breaking above them. They stayed there for a long moment, lovers in a world that had tried again and again to break them. But for the first time, neither of them felt alone. 1 year later, the Grant estate no longer felt like a mansion built to keep the world out, but rather a sanctuary shaped by gentler hands and echoes of laughter that had once been impossible to imagine within its walls. Sunlight spilled through the wide windows across the living room, warming the polished floor where Liam sat, cross-legged, sorting a puzzle into precise groups of matching colors, his calm concentration filling the space with a sense of quiet, order. Sophie watched him from the kitchen, her heart swelling each time he hummed softly under his breath, a sign that he felt safe, free, and finally unburdened by the fear that had shadowed their lives for years. She set a pot of water to boil, then glanced toward the rehabilitation room, where Elias moved slowly along the parallel bars, determination etched across every line of his face. He wore a brace along one leg and his movements were cautious but undeniably stronger. Sophie stepped closer, stopping just outside the doorway, watching as he shifted his weight, gripping the bar with one hand, then taking a deliberate slow step with the leg that doctors once said would never carry him again. Ava stood behind him, spotting his posture, but her smile was bright with pride. That is 2 steps without support, she said. Elias exhaled deeply, sweat clinging to his brow, but his expression was soft with triumph. 2 steps, he repeated, as if testing the truth of it. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. Seeing him like this, seeing him reclaim pieces of himself he once thought lost, felt like witnessing something holy. When he noticed her standing there, his face lit with a quiet warmth that still made her breath catch. "Sophie," he said, voice gentle, "come here." She moved to his side, placing a supportive hand on his back as he steadied himself. "You did not tell me you were trying without both bars," she whispered. He grinned faintly. "I wanted to surprise you." "You always do," she murmured, leaning in to kiss his cheek lightly. Ava chuckled. "I will give you 2 some space." She stepped out, leaving the couple in the soft afternoon light. Sophie brushed her fingers along Elias' arm, her touch a mixture of pride and tenderness. "You are walking again," she whispered. He nodded, slow but steady. "And I plan to walk a little more every day." He sat in his chair once the exertion became too much, and Sophie helped remove the brace, carefully massaging the tight muscles along his leg. Her hands were gentle, practiced from months of therapy and care. He watched her with that familiar look, admiration, devotion, and something deeper that always made her heart flutter. When she finished, he tugged her closer, letting his forehead rest against her stomach while she threaded her fingers into his hair. "You are the reason I tried again," he murmured. She smiled softly. "No, Elias. You are the reason you succeeded. I only stayed beside you." He looked up at her eyes, shining with emotion. "You stayed," he whispered. "That was everything." Later Sophie returned to the kitchen to finish preparing tea for Liam, and herself glancing once more toward the front entry table, where a small framed card stood. A 17 Freedom Fund. Printed in clean, bold letters beneath the name was the mission statement she and Elias wrote together, offering legal and emotional support for survivors who had been silenced by the same system that protected their abusers. The first year had already helped dozens of people find safety and justice. Sophie ran a thumb gently over the corner of the frame, remembering the day Elias insisted the fund should be named after what once tried to break her. "If a number stole your voice," he had said, "then a number will help give it back to others." Liam looked up from his puzzle as she brought out tea, and his face brightened. "Is Elias done walking practice?" he asked. Sophie nodded, smiling. "Yes, sweetheart. And he walked more today than yesterday." Liam clapped excitedly. "He is getting stronger." "Yes, he is," Sophie replied, her voice soft. "And so are we." Elias joined them soon after, rolling out from the rehab room, though he parked the chair beside the sofa rather than staying seated. He reached out and held Sophie's hand, pulling her gently onto his lap. She laughed, settling comfortably against him as Liam watched them with a contented grin. Things had changed so much in 1 year. The house, once cold and silent, was now filled with warmth, with conversation, with shared meals and laughter, and the steady rhythm of healing. Elias wrapped an arm around her waist, his thumb brushing circles against her skin. Sophie rested her head on his shoulder, inhaling his familiar scent, one that now meant safety and home. "Do you remember the night you told me not to touch the scar?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I remember everything." He tilted her face toward him. "That night you asked me not to touch your pain, and I kept that promise. But what I did touch," he whispered, voice warm and steady, "was your courage. And it changed me." She smiled, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, but these tears were soft, born from gratitude rather than fear. "You changed me too, Elias. More than you realize." He kissed her, then slow, deep, and full of a love that had grown not from perfection but from survival, from shared wounds, from 2 broken lives choosing to heal together. When they finally parted, Sophie whispered, "Elias, you are standing again." He smiled with quiet pride. "Yes," he said, "but standing was never the true victory. Loving you was." She rested her forehead against his, savoring the closeness. Outside, the rain began once more, light and steady, misting the glass with silver droplets. But neither of them feared storms anymore, not after the storm they had already survived. Liam came over, holding a completed section of his puzzle. "Look," he said proudly, "the picture is almost whole." Sophie kissed the top of his head. "Just like our family," she murmured. "Whole again." Elias squeezed her hand, intertwining their fingers. The man who once believed he had lost everything, now had a future built not on fear or isolation but on love, resilience, and the hard-fought return to hope. And as Sophie looked at him, her heart swelling with certainty, she knew one truth would never fade. He touched what she begged him not to, and in doing so he healed what she thought would never live again. The storm may have ended for Elias and Sophie, but their story is only one reminder of how many hearts in this world walk quietly with invisible scars, and how many people are still searching for a place where they can finally breathe, without fear. If this story touched you even for a moment, if you felt your chest tighten when Sophie broke down, if you felt your pulse race when Elias pushed through pain he was never meant to survive, or if you found yourself whispering, "Keep going," during his first steps, then I want to invite you to be part of something bigger than a story. Because stories only matter when they bring people together. Stories matter when they remind us that healing is not a straight line, that love is not about perfection, that broken does not mean unworthy, and that strength often looks nothing like power, and everything like showing up for someone when the world expects you to walk away. If this story made you feel something, whether it was hope or anger or warmth, or a quiet ache that stayed with you longer than you expected, please take a second to like this video, because every tap helps the story reach someone who might need it. Someone who might be sitting in the dark right now the way Sophie once did, believing no one will ever find them. Someone who might feel stuck in a moment of loss the way Elias did, believing nothing beautiful can grow again after a life-shattering fall. And if you want more stories like this, stories about resilience, slow-burning romance, redemption through gentleness, and the kind of love that heals instead of harms, make sure you subscribe. We post new stories every week, each one written with care, each one crafted to reach the quiet places in your heart, the places you might not show to the world but still need to be seen. Drop a comment and tell me where you are listening from, whether it is morning, night, afternoon, a busy workday, or a quiet moment before sleep. Tell me which part made your heart stop for a second. Was it the first time Elias covered her with his coat? Was it when Sophie hid in the laundry room shaking but still fighting to breathe? Was it when Elias tried to climb the hill in the rain, calling her name as if his soul would not survive losing her? Or was it the moment he fell to one knee and asked not to touch her past, but to touch her future? Your comments mean more than you think. They help shape the next stories, they help guide what this channel creates, and they remind us that on the other side of every screen is a human being with real emotions, real battles, and real hope. And if you or someone you know has ever faced fear the way Sophie did, if you have ever been made to feel small or unheard, if you have ever struggled to believe you deserve love and safety, please know this channel is a place for you. You are seen here, you are welcome here, and you are not alone. Share this story with someone who needs strength today, with a friend who loves romance, with someone who needs a reminder that good men still exist, even when they are fighting their own battles, even when their bodies carry pain, even when the world tells them they are not enough. Before you go, answer one question for me in the comments, because your voice matters. If you had one message you could whisper to your past self, to the version of you who was scared, who felt lost, who thought love would never find them, what would you say? I will be reading every answer. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for spending this time with us. Until the next story, take care of your heart, hold on to hope, and remember this truth that Sophie and Elias taught us. Even the most shattered paths can lead to love again.